Hello and welcome to Kikao, your weekly guide on the big issues affecting Africa's agriculture. This week, we focus on climate change, that real and present global disaster that is keeping everyone on edge. We'll be asking, what are the impacts of climate change in Africa, and what can the continent do to cope with those impacts? We'll also be looking at Africa's position at the COP27, that global summit on the environment and climate change that this year will be hosted by Africa. We'll be talking about that in a moment with our usual panel. But first,
there should be a focused research for the continent. We know what we have. We know what we lack. We should streamline our research activity towards what we lack so that to get what we want.
Let's now join Dr. Canisius Kanangire, the Executive Director of AATF, as he speaks to his panel for this week on the question of climate change in Africa.
On Kikao this week, we will discuss the continent's needs and hopes as COP27 draws closer. My name is Dr. Canisius Kanangire. I'm the Executive Director of AATF, and my guests today are Dr. George Wamukoya, Lead Agriculture Negotiator for the African Group of Negotiators, and Kopep Dabugati, the coordinator of CADEP, Non-State Actors Coalition. Brothers, you are welcome to this Kikao show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
What would you say are the obvious, very obvious impact of climate change with regard to food security on the African continent?
I think Africa is faced with a very serious problem because in terms of climate change, we are the ones that are least contributing to climate change, but we are the ones that are worst affected by the effects in the form of droughts, in the form of flooding, in the form of several climate variability. Our ecosystems are changing rapidly due to these effects of the climate change, and it is affecting even the social life that we live, the way that communities live together with people. We're beginning to see a lot of conflicts owing to climate change. We're beginning to see a lot of communities are not able to grow the crops that traditionally they've been growing over the years. And of course, they've studied the weather patterns and have understood it. But now, these weather patterns are erratic. They are no longer straightforward. So they cannot be able to work according to the weather patterns. And a lot of communities are also being displaced as a result of flooding, and increased rainfall. So we have a lot of problems.
So the impacts are being seen in our communities.
Yes.
And it is not only about food insecurity.
No.
It goes much beyond.
It goes beyond
that. It is change
that.
of diet and cultural habits. It is also bringing in insecurity.
Yes.
And some regions are even very vulnerable to that. And I know in many summits and other conferences, they have talked about Lake Chad region, and somehow climate change could be contributing to the whole phenomenon. Do you have some fact on that?
Well, yes, it could be contributing to the phenomenon because the Lake Chad is drying. It's drying up. Of course, the yield in fish, the yield in irrigation around the Lake Chad basin is also affected by that. But then we know that, yes, that is part of it, but then there is also the social and religious part of the issues and the conflicts around the Lake Chad. So we can't divorce it. It's a social construct.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are many aspects
Yes.
which are somehow implicated.
Yes.
Yeah, George, is the continent, the African continent, coping somehow? What are the resilience and adaptation mechanisms that the African continent is taking? Are we doing something? Are we good at the resilience or adaptation to climate change issues?
No, thanks. No, the answer is no. The reason being that climate change has completely affected the traditional approaches that we've used, and therefore farmers are struggling to produce under very difficult circumstances. And in most cases, farmers lose almost everything because of the onset of the rain, and sometimes the rain that would come in 3 or 4 months spread comes in 1 week, and therefore wipes out everything. Or if they survive, then the crops lose the water, and therefore they have challenges. And therefore coping based on the traditional approaches right now is very difficult. We have to find another way by which we get our farmers to not just cope, but to adapt and build resilience. The worst hit are actually the livestock keepers. As you're aware, a large part of the continent is arid and semi-arid lands, which usually is habited by the pastoral communities. And these communities, for many years and centuries, they are used to migrating from one region to another in search of pasture. And those patterns were good because there was plenty, and therefore they could sustain. But now, right now, it's not possible for them, and that's why I think recently we had an incident where the government of Uganda had to send away the pastoralists from Kenya because, one, there is conflict with respect to the resources, but also that led to an insecurity issue. And as a consequence, the government said, no, we can no longer have this. And that is the challenge that we're having even in the negotiations, because we're saying the way climate change is affecting Africa, it's no longer possible for our farmers to be food secure. And that means most of our countries and the economies are going to import a lot of food from outside. And the question is, where do you import the food when Africa has the best available arable land?
Arable land. I think that is very, complicated, I would say. We are talking of that vulnerability of our farmers. We are talking of pastoralists who have a very serious problem with their cattle. We are talking of the social problems which come out of it, including insecurity in those regions. So all that happen when we are talking of sustainable development, sustainable green growth, pathways. How do you think Africa will address those challenges related to its green growth pathways?
Yeah, generally we have a challenge in the sense that if you look at the way the climate change issues were to be addressed following the Rio meeting where the UNFCCC was adopted, it was very clear that countries that are vulnerable, like the continent of Africa, is supported by, for means of implementation, which is finance, technology, and capacity building. Unfortunately, that has shifted through the Paris Agreement, where now all countries, irrespective of those that are contributing the least, have to play a role in addressing the global challenge called climate change. Now, the challenge many of our countries are having is they are now required to prepare what we call long-term low-emission climate resilient development strategies, which means they look at where would they be in 2050. And then they also prepare what we call nationally determined contributions, where they set a target as to how much they are going to reduce in terms of emission and costing. Now, with that, then many of our countries have said, we're going to take some steps, but we're going to require support. Now, if you look at all the African, the NDCs submitted by African countries, they have what we call conditional support and domestic support. Let me give an example of Kenya. Kenya has its national determined contribution, which with a target of 32%, which has been costed to 62 billion for the period between 2020 and 2030. And Kenya has committed that it is going to use domestic resources to fund 13% of the 62 billion. Now the question you ask, where is Kenya going to get the 13% of 62 billion to address climate change, which is an additionality to the development challenges that we have? And that is a problem. But also, if you look at the international support that's expected, which is 87%, it's not flowing. So in effect, the economy is going to be affected because Kenya cannot put resources where it requires most because it has to demonstrate how it's contributing to reducing emissions. But also, it means that we are transferring the responsibility of dealing with climate change to Kenya and the people of Kenya.
And the people of Kenya. I think here we have, I will just take what the common citizen of any of these countries in Africa say. We are not very much those responsible of the climate change issues, but we are taking all the burden of it. And then at the end, they ask us to prepare a plan. Yes. But that plan first should stop the flow coming to here. So stop first to continue emitting those things. And we can't. We know we can't. No, then the plan we are doing has so many things we don't have control of. So, and we are talking of key agreement. You talked about Paris Agreement. So let's take a break. And when we come, let's go to that Paris Agreement and see how it will help solve the problem.
Yeah, that's good.
COPAP said that in Paris Agreement there is an element of finance. George, can you shed more light first on how Africa is implementing the Paris Agreement? How far are we? How effective are we? What are the performance of the continent? And then also give us some ideas on this financing which has been stated in the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, thanks. One is that when we were negotiating, initially it was designed that there will be an international instrument to bring together all parties in 2009 in Copenhagen. And it's during that time that, in fact, that's the first time Africa negotiated as a bloc with Prime Minister Meles, the late Prime Minister Meles of Ethiopia, being the chair of the Committee of Heads of State and Government on climate change. And it's Prime Minister Meles, through negotiations with President Obama then, the US president, and the Danish government, that came up with a figure of 100 billion. At that time, we didn't have any figure to work with. And so when I recall the meeting we had with the ministers, where Prime Minister Meles briefed the African ministers, they wanted to know the basis of 100 billion because they believed that the needs for Africa are beyond 100 billion. And the answer, the response from Prime Minister Meles was that let's start with something, and then we can build on it. But unfortunately, we did not reach an agreement in Copenhagen, but that figure was already floated, and that figure now finally was accepted as part of the climate change discourse in 2010 in Cancun. And since then, it was that there will be 100 billion per year by 2020. Okay. The assumption for many was that every year there will be 100 billion.
100 billion.
But now it has come to be realized that when we were in Glasgow, that no, it is 100 billion by 2020. Okay. Which is a very minimal cost. For example, if one country says it wants, it requires 62 billion, then how about the whole 134 developing countries that require that finance? And therefore, we have to find a way to have innovative financing being brought or coming into effect. And it's on that basis that, as my colleague has indicated, the mobilizing resources from private sector appears to be the most logical now, because the public funding is shrinking. Now, many countries, and I think Nigeria was the first one, then with Kenya, and then I think South Africa, they are using green bonds.
Is it promising?
Yes, it's promising because for example, the one for Kenya was actually oversubscribed, and I think what now needs to be done is how can we frame those kind of green bonds so that we can be able to raise more resources to invest in adaptation, because generally adaptation is unattractive to private sector, and therefore you need to incentivize so that the private sector feels that you are recognizing they are doing some service, and if we did that, much of what we see as CSR actually may end up coming into climate space. Yeah, but
now, from what you have said, it is not a very easy thing.
No.
And I can see the work of a negotiator. It is not an easy one.
Yes.
It is not an easy one. Let me ask you now on what will be happening soon. How Africa is prepared on this COP27 in the area of agriculture, for example, because we have many losses and damages also when we have those events like a cyclone.
Yes, I think I will draw our attention to the UN Food System Summit that was just concluded last year. There were a lot of things that were that Africa put forward as the African common position on agriculture in the UN Food Systems Summit process, and there has been a lot of mention about the need to increase the financing for climate change, the need to increase our abilities for resilience and adaptation to climate change. Now, we are talking about money, but again, there is a lot of needs, there is a lot of loss and damages that we need to take care of in this climate process, which brings us back again to the issue of innovative financing. I mean, there is an age-old African saying that if you want to do something well, you do it yourself. Africans need to begin to stand up and fund their own development processes. And I think also in the Africa Agenda 2063, that is one of the main points that the entire process hinges upon: Africa funding its development.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, from the negotiations perspective, we, as Africa Group, we had our meeting in Naivasha on 2nd to 4th, where we brought together the negotiators from across the continent, together with the experts, scientific experts. We were to look at how agriculture is now being, where we are in the negotiations, and what we want out of COP27. And there are two things primarily. First one is that we want a specific body under UNFCCC to deal with matters of agriculture. And the reason is, if you look at the convention in Article 2 of the UNFCCC convention, it talks about actions that you take in stabilizing the climate system should not threaten food production. Now, up to today, we have not framed something that protects agriculture. And
yet it is very important.
And yet it's very important.
Yeah.
Then secondly, under Paris Agreement, in Article 2, again, it is very clear that if you look at Article 2, paragraph 1b, it talks about increasing the ability to adapt to adverse impacts of climate change, foster climate resilient and low emission climate development without threatening food production.
I think it becomes very important. We will take a break, and when we come, we look at agriculture, and you talked about scientists who were invited to the meeting which took place in Naivasha. What's the role of scientists in this? I think we will talk of it when we come back. Welcome back to Kikao.
Thank you.
We were talking of the challenges of addressing climate change issues and the resilience-related issues for the African continent. And we talked about a number of factors, including capacity, including finance, etc. What would be the role of science, technology, and innovation in addressing some of those challenges and bringing about resilience on climate change to the continent of Africa?
Now, from the Paris and Convention, science informs the international policy. That's why the IPCC reports that are released, they inform the next negotiations. For example, the AR6, the sixth assessment report that has just been released is going to be a subject of discussion in June. And therefore, there we have a few challenges from Africa perspective. One is the issue of publications by African scientists so that we can have our African narrative perspectives. Unfortunately, we have very few scientists that are involved in the IPCC, either as lead authors or reviewers, and also few scientists are publishing in scholarly peer-reviewed journals, which form the basis and the cornerstone of IPCC. So one of the concerns as negotiators that we put forward to our scientists is that if we hope to influence the science that comes out to inform the policy which affects our national policy, then it's important that one, we publish the good work that we're doing, don't keep it on the shelves, and number two, we should volunteer to be lead authors and reviewers. University of Cape Town has a system now, and the majority of the reviewers and lead authors are coming from South Africa, which is unfortunate. That's the first part. The second part, which is important, is that we need scientists in the negotiations. Yes. Because what has happened is, I'm not an agriculture expert myself. I'm a lawyer. Mm-hmm. But I'm lead negotiator for agriculture. So I'll be very good in the processes and making sure that what is being drafted is in the right, doesn't affect Africa. but I need
You
evidence
need a team, yes,
behind me.
bringing you data,
Yes,
evidences,
and it's on that
directions.
basis that since 2009, we put together, when I was serving in COMESA, we put together a team of African group of negotiators, expert support, that brings together the negotiators plus scientists, experts
In various areas,
in various
which are
areas,
relevant
so
to
that
this.
we discuss this is what is coming and how do we frame it, and they help us to frame. And that's what we were doing in Naivasha the other day. And that costs money, and that means that some of the scientists must attend those meetings and be following those aspects.
But it's very important to communicate that to the research institutions.
Yes.
But STI in this adaptation business can go also not directly to the science of climate change per se, physics, meteorology, and etc., but other sciences which can come in and provide capability of, for example, the crops to adapt to the to drought and hence provide adaptation to climate change. Do you have some
Yes.
application of that kind of sciences in Africa?
Well, I don't know whether we have publications, but let me tell you this about agriculture in Africa at the moment. The Comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program is the, what should I call it? The state of the art in terms of agricultural policy. That's the most advanced policy in the world when it comes to agriculture, because it talks about evidence. Evidence means science. It also means, what you have observed from practice over time. So, back to your question, Prof. One of the key things that would move agriculture in Africa forward is the use of evidence. And when we are talking about this science, we bring it into agriculture. We are trying to see how, for example, our crops, our seeds can get better, better yielding, better resistance to drought, better resistance to disease and pest. We're talking about how these products that come out from the product of innovation, science, and technology will be able to lead Africa, will be able to improve African agriculture such that it becomes, a means of sustainable livelihood for farmers, for agriculturalists, and that in itself will contribute to boosting the economic power of the continent, which is the goal of CAADP. So it is non-negotiable. However, I see that not enough is being done to communicate, this need for science or even these findings that have been done in the scientific field that can support our agriculture. Rather, we see a lot of work being done against it. We see a lot of voices talking against biotechnology. We need more voices that can be able to explain, the different aspects of this biotechnology to the African populace, to the African government, so that we have the kind of environment we need to pick it up. And lastly, let us make sure that these technologies, these STIs, are speaking to the interests of our people. Let it be homegrown. Yes. Let the science, technology, the STI agenda be homegrown. What I mean by homegrown is, for example, we don't bring seeds from outside Africa. Rather, we use African seeds, improve them, because they've acquired a lot of resilience, a lot of adaptability over the years. We can use those seeds to improve on them for the African society.
That is very good. I think that is what we have been talking about. You need solutions, homegrown solutions, to make your voice, to claim your space, and also to influence whatever decision will be taken later. AATF is bringing a number of technologies which are drought resistant, for example, or insect resistant, and those insects are proliferating because of the impact of climate change. And we have those technologies applied to cowpea. BT cowpea is one of them. We have those technologies applied to maize. Telemaize is one of them. But also we have many other technologies where we have seeds produced in a conventional way, but which have the trait to resist, to be drought sensitive. And that, I think, can contribute significantly to address issues of adaptation of agriculture in Africa to that. Of course, it is just one area where science and technology can come to contribute, and it needs, as you said, a lot of communication and also a scaling up. Scaling up the use of those technologies to have impactful result and really influence the way Africans practice agriculture in this era where we have devastation from climate change issues.
May I add?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I think there is an opening which AATF and others have not used. At all the 54 countries, except the upper one, you know that one, have submitted their nationally determined contributions, saying this is a problem and these are the proposed actions. And I've had the opportunity to look at many of them, and I've been involved in a number of them. The first is improved crop varieties. Okay. Second, improved livestock breeds to deal with all those things. But I think we have not linked the scientists, scientific institutions that have these products, to sit with government, policymakers, and say, yes, Kenya, we look at your NDC, the National Determined Contribution. You say that you want action, one of the adaptation action is improved crop varieties, including Uganda, because I'm supporting Uganda to do the long-term strategy. And one of the priority actions is improved crop varieties, improved livestock breeds. You ask them, how do you plan to achieve it? What products do we have? Using their own policy documents, you'll be able to turn around that conflict or tension that we have between policy and science. And so for me, because I used to be a scientist before I became a policy drafter, and I always emphasize the point of science, policy, and practice interface. Yes. Because then you are able to get the best solution to address that. Yeah.
There is like a huge gap between research, policy, and practice. Yes. And we need absolutely to bring those players together so that one can cross-fertilize the other. Yeah. And once we have bridged the three big components, I think then we can start having impact. Yeah. One alone cannot achieve it. 1 minute to each. What is it that you expect COP27, which will be held in Africa, to deliver for our continent?
I expect that Africans will take charge of their own situation. And as Prof said earlier, we need to get scientists on the negotiation table because they can be able to speak the language, of what is real about this climate change issue. Yeah.
So Africa needs to take advantage of this COP27 happening in Africa. George?
Ours is very clear. We want a decision which establishes a constituted body to coordinate all matters of agriculture within the UNFCCC, and one that will link matters of agriculture with the Green Climate Fund so that we are able to implement activities because agriculture is the most affected right now, and we cannot compromise food security. And the Paris Agreement is very clear. We have to safeguard food security, and that's what the least we can get is. And I'm happy that we've discussed with the Egyptian presidency, and they are on the same page. And we are very hopeful that we're going to get a good decision on agriculture so that it can facilitate all our institutions that have interest in this area.
Absolutely. Climate change has brought a lot of losses and damages in different areas. But in agriculture, it touches more closely the human being because hunger and poverty are linked. And then the others will be just like side effects. Insecurity and others will come to add on that. How do we make sure that agriculture takes the position it deserves in COP27? It is one thing that we need to do from now to November so that we speak with one voice to that problem which is very critical. I thank you very much, George. I thank you very much, COPEP. I think climate change is so important that we will have to organize another or other Kikaos so that we can continue this discussion and bring communication to all the stakeholders, including the practitioners, the policymakers, and the researchers, so that the three key players can have bridges and work together to really inform the position and equip the negotiators. Thank you very much for this very informative Kikao.
And now to our science terminology for the week on Science Speak. Now, our word for this week is greenhouse gases. Usually, this is very common in conversations about climate change. Now, greenhouse gases are those gases in the Earth's atmosphere that trap heat. They let the sunlight pass through the Earth but prevents that heat from leaving the atmosphere, thus causing a general rise in temperatures on Earth. Ever heard of global warming? Yes, and so there is no doubt that climate change is happening, and Africa is on the sharp end of that crisis. But then there are ways to cope with it, and the experts say the continent must step up and do what it needs to do. Until next time, this has been your weekly show, Kikao. Thanks for watching. My name is Joe Agayo.